Welcome to the Bookworm Duo, where we explore a variety of books. Let's get started. Welcome to the deep dive. Look, we know you're here because you want to get a really solid understanding of things, but, well, your time's valuable too, right?
Absolutely. Getting to the core quickly but thoroughly.
Exactly. So today, that's what we're doing with some truly foundational books. Our goal, it's to follow the sequence of events in their stories, step by step.
Giving you that clear picture of the narrative flow, what happens, why it unfolds that way.
Think of it like tracing the plot, following the narrative thread through literary history. And our roadmap for this comes from excerpts of Writers Who Changed History by DK. So let's dive in.
It's always fascinating, isn't it? How just arranging events, telling a story in a certain order can change everything. We'll see that unfolding today.
Okay, well, let's kick things off chronologically, way back with Giovanni Boccaccio and the Decameron. You have to picture the scene. Florence, just devastated by the plague.
Yeah, Boccaccio even lost his own father to it in 1348. A truly grim time.
But kind of paradoxically, this awful period became this time when intellectuals gathered at his place. And over the next 3 years or so, he writes the Decameron.
Mm,
What really jumps out is how these stories, they moved away from the typical medieval stuff, saints, allegories of vice and virtue.
right. Less abstract morality, more human.
Exactly. He focused on the everyday lives of ordinary people, their successes, their mistakes, their messy lives. They feel like real people, not just symbols.
And that's the key shift, isn't it? Boccaccio zooms in on the human condition, the whole spectrum, even with the plague raging outside. Love, cleverness, misfortune, humor, it's all in there.
Not just pious lessons.
Not at all. This focus on, let's call it dimensional humanity rather than just divine lessons, was, well, pre-revolutionary for prose. It really laid the foundations for the kind of narrative storytelling that blossomed in the Renaissance, capturing life itself.
Yeah, like saying, even amidst disaster, these individual stories matter. Okay, let's jump forward a bit. Geoffrey Chaucer, The Canterbury Tales.
Ugh, Chaucer. A different world again.
Totally. I mean, this guy was busy. Civil servant, bureaucrat, diplomat, deep in the court circles of Edward III and Richard II.
He had powerful connections, like John of Gaunt, who actually became his brother-in-law. And he married well, too.
And he wasn't just, rubbing elbows. He got prestigious jobs. Like in 1374, customs controller for London. That's a big deal.
It certainly was.
Yeah.
So how does that background feed into the structure, the sequence of events in the Canterbury Tale?
Oh, the whole thing is framed as a storytelling contest, right?
Precisely. You have this really diverse group of people, pilgrims, heading to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury.
All thrown together on the road.
Exactly. And to kill time, the innkeeper suggests they each tell stories on the way there and back. Winner gets a free meal.
Huh. Classic.
So this journey, this pilgrimage, becomes the container for all these different tales told by all these different types of people. A journey holding many smaller journeys, narratively speaking.
It makes you think of the Decameron again, that framing device.
The comparison is almost unavoidable, isn't it? 10 people telling 100 stories while fleeing the plague near Florence in Boccaccio. A group of pilgrims telling stories on a journey in Chaucer.
Did one inspire the other, maybe?
It's definitely possible Boccaccio's structure gave Chaucer some ideas. Both use that frame to weave together disparate stories. But what makes Chaucer's feel so, well, grounded is how he seems to have based his characters on real types of people, maybe even specific individuals he knew.
Right. I read that even the innkeeper, Harry Bailey, shared a name with a real London innkeeper of the time.
Adds that little touch of reality, doesn't it? It makes the whole sequence of tales feel anchored in the actual world, even while being fiction.
And beyond the structure, Chaucer was a word guy, a linguistic pioneer.
Oh, absolutely. Metrically innovative. He's credited with developing rhyme royal, that 7-line stanza. And he was one of the first major poets to really master the 5-stress line, the iambic pentameter, in English.
And crucially, he wrote it all in Middle English.
Yes. Not Latin, not the French of the court and nobility, but the English spoken by ordinary folk. That was a massive choice.
How did that choice shape the narrative itself?
Well, it made the stories accessible, for one, but it also sort of validated English as a language capable of great literature. It reflected the diverse voices of his pilgrims and brought literature down from the elite circles, in a way. The language choice is intrinsically linked to the story's event-making literature for the people he was writing about.
Makes sense. Okay, fast forward again, couple of centuries. 16th century Spain, Miguel de Cervantes.
And the behemoth, Don Quixote.
Often called the first great modern novel, Cervantes himself, what a life soldier, poet, playwright, novelist.
Lived through Spain's golden century, a real cultural explosion. He wrote plays early on, like The Dungeons of Algiers, Numantia, a romance called La Galatea.
But it wasn't smooth sailing financially, was it?
No, definitely not. Despite writing, he struggled with money problems for much of his life. He ended up moving to Madrid, kept writing exemplary novels, journeyed to Parnassus, and then came Don Quixote.
And even getting that published wasn't straightforward. There's a story there, too.
Oh, absolutely. Part 1 comes out in 1605, huge success.
Right.
But then some anonymous author publishes a counterfeit Part 2.
No way! Seriously?
Yep. Which, understandably, really annoyed Cervantes and spurred him on to write his own authentic sequel, which he published in 1615.
Wow. So the actual publication history is part of the drama.
It really is. He died just a year later, in 1616. And another novel, Persiles, which he literally finished just days before his death, came out posthumously in 1617. It shows you something about the book world back then burgeoning, but also a bit Wild West.
So beyond the publishing saga, what about the novel's event structure? What makes Don Quixote so modern, so revolutionary in how its story unfolds?
I think it's the way Cervantes messes with reality. The whole premise.
Yeah.
Alonso Quijano reads so many chivalric romances, he loses his mind and believes he is a knight-errant, Don Quixote.
Right, he gets obsessed.
Totally. And the narrative just follows his adventures, which are mostly delusions bumping up against the hard edges of the real world. Sancho Panza, his squire, is sort of the voice of reason, but even he gets swept up sometimes.
So the events are driven by his fantasy.
Exactly. It's this constant back and forth, this blurring of fact and fantasy. Cervantes constantly plays with perspective, even breaking the fourth wall sometimes. He pulls the reader into Quixote's madness, makes us question what's real within the story. That kind of experimental, self-aware storytelling was incredibly new.
Okay, one more jump. Early 18th century England. Daniel Defoe and Robinson Crusoe.
Defoe, another fascinating character. Deeply involved in politics, a real pamphleteer.
Yeah, he even got thrown in prison for one pamphlet, The Shortest Way with the Dissenters. Controversial guy.
Very. And he wrote other things, like A Journal of the Plague Year, which reads almost like nonfiction, though it's fictionalized.
But Robinson Crusoe, 1719, that's the one usually flagged as one of the first proper novels in English.
It's definitely a cornerstone. And its narrative structure, the sequence of events, is key to that.
How so?
Well, it's incredibly methodical. The story just lays out chronologically what happens after Crusoe gets shipwrecked on this deserted island.
Step-by-step survival.
Precisely. How he builds shelter, finds food, makes tools, keeps track of time, his religious thoughts, encountering Friday. It's all presented in this very detailed, almost practical, journalistic style.
It feels very real, plausible.
That's the effect. That realism, that focus on the mundane details of survival and self-reliance, told in a linear fashion from a single character's perspective that was new, it gives the events a sense of immediacy.
So the narrative is propelled simply by his day-to-day efforts to stay alive and eventually build a life there.
Exactly. It's the ultimate story of individualism and endurance, and the narrative structure, that straightforward chronological accounting of events, is perfectly suited to conveying that. It established a blueprint for a certain kind of novel.
So looking back across these Boccaccio's collection framed by disaster, Chaucer's pilgrimage contest, Cervantes' reality-bending quest, Defoe's meticulous survival log.
You really see an evolution in how writers thought about ordering events to create meaning and engage the reader.
From communal storytelling surviving trauma, to diverse voices on a journey, to exploring the inner world of delusion, to charting solitary survival.
Each structure serves the story's core themes. The way the story unfolds is inseparable from what the story is. And these choices had a massive impact, shaping what we even think of as a novel today.
Okay, so we've walked through the narrative sequence in these landmark books. The goal was to give you that clear progression, how one event leads to the next. Hopefully that's offered some solid insights.
That maybe sparks some curiosity to actually read them or reread them with this focus in mind.
Definitely. Which brings us to something for you to chew on. Thinking about these different ways of ordering a story, the frame tale, the journey, the subjective quest, the chronological account.
How do you think the specific historical context of each author, the plague for Boccaccio, medieval society for Chaucer, Spain's golden age for Cervantes, early capitalism for Defoe, might have influenced why they chose to structure their narratives in those particular ways?
Yeah, how did their world shape the very sequence of the stories they told? Something to consider. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe for more bookish adventures and hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride. Don't forget to share the knowledge, spread the word.